Now we come to our last chat of the day, a third bit of the puzzle of this question about dialogue and agency. So this is a shorter talk. Throughout the talks today, we've been asking this question: how do we design dialogue to give players the feeling of having agency? And in the first talk, we gave you a series of recommendations. And in the second talk, Matt gave you a series of recommendations. Now we're going to give you the results of some experiments that support our recommendations. So we went out and checked with players whether the things that we thought were plausible and the things that we thought were true bore out. Because it's one thing to go looking online for what players complain about. It's quite another to show them an alternative and see if that stops the complaining. So we're turning to some very particular dialogue mechanics. We're going to give you the real nitty-gritty on a couple of experiments, and we're going to provide some empirical evidence that they improve player experience. So first, what is the problem that we're interested in? So we know that in real life conversation, memory plays an invaluable role. And you'll already, I'm sure those of you who are sensitive to foreshadowing, hear what Matt was saying about state tracking kind of echoing in the background. There's a social expectation when we talk to remember who we've spoken to, what stories we told them, and to utilize our knowledge and past experience in subsequent conversations. But in video games, we don't share the burden of memory nearly so equitably. Usually the NPCs are the people that know everything, and they will tell us about it ad infinitum. They're often tasked with imparting information single-handedly. And that makes sense, right? As players, we often don't know what the quest is. But we think that that arrangement, that one-sided arrangement, negatively affects players' perceived agency. And so we hypothesized that a solution to this is to give players more agency with interactive repair. So Sean, what's repair?
What? Well, that's an example of what repair is. In conversation, repair is a way of fixing problems. And it's also a way of managing what Steph was talking about. So let's give an example. In this example from Final Fantasy X.
My favorite one.
Titus says, I hope Yuna's okay. And we get the reply, a possible reply could be, Yuna might die because of the spiral of death. That's when someone has challenged the bringer of death, but she'll make it. Now, we as writers you as writers might recognize this as exposition dumping. There's a lot of stuff we didn't really ask for in here. And from a pragmatics point of view, it's face threatening because we're giving people information that they might already have. It threatens their negative face. And we know we all have this experience of, well, I might have more of this experience of over-explaining things to people. People get offended by this. So instead, what tends to happen in conversation is something more like this. We could imagine using repair. So we could have Oron say, she'll make it. Titus would say, what? And then as a signal that we need some more information. The spiral of death. Huh? Someone has challenged the bringer of death. And in fact, this is the conversation we see in the game. And there's somewhere in between, right? So we could rewrite this dialogue as, she'll make it. And then Titus says, make it, what, so she can die? The spiral of death. Someone has challenged the bringer of death? Yes. So each of these three ways of writing this dialogue convey the same information, but they manage the burden of conversation differently. And I think it shows opportunities to give more or less character to different people. What we want to do is test whether this actually affects player experience with some hard data. So we have a simple experiment where players play two versions of a short interactive dialogue, one version without repair mechanisms, and then another version with repair mechanisms. We hypothesize that players should prefer the one with repair. So they're recorded with a speak aloud procedure. and then we do a little survey on their preferences. We did this with 30 experienced play testers recruited via Go Testify, which I'll talk about in a little bit.
Great. So this is the game that we made using Twine and using our custom Twine extension for running these kinds of experiments, co-designed with the lovely Will Scully, who I believe is in the chat. And this is Potion Posty. So this is what a screen in Potion Posty looks like. It's a dialogue game. Dialogue's the only mechanic. And in terms of the narrative, this is what happens. So you're a new postie in town delivering, oh, if you're not from Britain, postie means the person who delivers the mail. So you're a little goblin delivering the mail. The first person you talk to is a witch called Tabitha, who asks you to give some grobble cakes to Mick the Mage down at the Castle of Onions. On the way to the castle, you meet an enigmatic fox who gives you some more information and tells you that he just saw Mick the Mage, who lives at the castle, and he's very worried about this fire tournament, the Burnament. Sean loves puns.
Not just Sean.
Not just Sean, that's true. You were scathing about Final Fantasy X. Yeah. I've got to throw you under the bus here. Then you meet Mick the Mage, who you give the grobbles to. And he reveals that this is part of a rivalry, that she's poisoned these grobble cakes with blingberries that would turn him into a toad and make him miss the fire tournament. You can find out that he has a secret weapon to douse her fire. And then at the end of the game, you speak to the fox a little bit again, and the fox lets you know that he also is going to enter the fire tournament. So very simple, very, just a prototype of a game. So in the first version, although players play them in different orders, in the control condition for the game, Tabitha's dialogue looks like this. Hello, I'm Tabitha. I'm glad you've come. Please give these grobble cakes to Mick the Mage down at the Castle of Onions. He loves them. So you get all the exposition at once, and the player character, the goblin, just says okay to advance the dialogue. In the repair condition, Tabitha gives you just some of the information. Please give these grobbles to Mick down at the castle. And the player can choose if they want to just say okay and move on, or if they want to follow up, if they want to interact with repair and thus find out more information. So if you choose to who, Tabitha confirms, oh, Mick the Mage, I'd like you to take these grobbles to him down at the castle. And so on. You can ask about a bit more information about the second one should be to what, I think, and you can ask down where. So just so that you get a sense of the dialogue tree, this is, you don't have to read this, but this is the dialogue tree for Tabitha using our dialogue visualizer. Okay, it's not just that you can enact this open repair. You can also learn information from previous conversations, so for example with Tabitha, and then offer that as a candidate response when you have that conversation. So you get to earn bits of lore from a previous conversation and bring it up. So here, talking to the fox, I just came from the castle. Mick is very worried about the Burnament, and we see the kind of standard options as well as a highlighted option in a different colour that says Mick the Mage, which you only get if you asked a bit more about Mick in the previous conversation. If you choose Mick the Mage, the fox says that's right, he lives at the castle, he couldn't stop going on about the Burnament.
We collected this data using a Go Testify's system, where you can put up a game for trained playtesters to play. They play through it while speaking their thoughts aloud. It's recorded and then transcribed, and there are tools for searching and finding problems. It's a really great tool that we've been very lucky to be able to use, and we're going to tell you some results.
Yes, but before we do, somebody's asked in the chat, and I think it's probably important that we clarify it here. What is the difference between open repair, restricted repair, and that other one?
That's a good case of repair to fix some problems in communication. Yeah, let's go all the way. Oh no, I'm going far.
You need to go back to that slide. Yeah.
Yeah. So open repair, these are sort of three types of repair that can happen in conversation. Open repair is just going, what? Or just signaling, there's some problem, you fix it. Restricted repair is when you say, I had a problem with this particular part of what you've been talking about. And confirmation repair is when you say, is this what you mean? And the other person just says yes. So there's a sort of the burden of conversation is less for the person who's repairing for open repair and less for the first speaker in confirmation repair.
Great. Thank you very much. Sorry, we'll just go back forward. I hope that clears it up. What did we find, Sean?
Well, and these are very hot off the press
Very results.
But we found, first of all, players preferred repair. So in the survey, 63% said they preferred the repair version overall, whereas only 22% said they preferred the control version. And some people said they were roughly the same. So that's about 3 times more people prefer the repair version. So it's great. We also looked at whether things were more engaging, more fun, whether they play it again in terms of agency. And those are very similar results. The sort of realism, there was a bit of a difference, and people were more likely to say the control version was more frustrating, which also fits with what we thought. We found some interesting things. So, for example, players who engaged more in repair, who actually chose more of the repair options, were more likely to say that they were having more fun in the repair version, which is also kind of interesting and suggests that.
Yeah. It's also kind of not surprising. So there was a small number of players, but still, a chunk of players who preferred the control version. And those tended to be the ones who didn't engage in repair. So the people for whom dialogue is just something that you get through to get to the game, might not want to engage in this kind of system, but those players who like narrative games, who want to treat dialogue as a big part of the game and want to learn that information, enjoyed it more. So that's not surprising, but nice to be able to prove.
We also found that players who offered more candidate understandings, who did that make them age question that was highlighted, they were more likely to report that they preferred the repair version in terms of engagement. And lots of people in the qualitative responses said things like, it made me feel like as if I actually learned the information I talked about with another character when talking about someone else. So by chunking it up, by making them think about the options, it also has the effect of making them more engaged, which also makes sense.
Yeah. So I said earlier that some people like stats and some people are more moved by individual examples. So here are some things that players said about their experience in terms of agency. So one player said, I found that my responses in the dialogue mattered more with the repair version, since I had more variety and freedom to ask questions. The control dialogue did not give me the same freedom to ask questions, rather just choose my reactions to prompts. Another said, I felt like my responses were more meaningful than in the control version. What's interesting is that some players seem to think that these choices changed the narrative of the story, which they didn't. So it might add to the illusion of agency. So this player said it gives you the opportunity to change the narrative of the story depending on the dialogue options you choose, which I think makes the game unique and interesting. But even those players who realized that these choices didn't lead to a change in the kind of overall narrative still thought that repair enhanced agency. So, for example, this player said, even though choices didn't appear to impact the story, it still felt like I was interacting with the characters and felt like I was making personal choices, which is in line with many of the things we've talked about and that Matt talked about today. We also found, and this was more surprising to us, I think it's fair to say, that people felt that dialogue repair enhanced characterization. So people said, for example, that repair felt like the characters had more personality. Another said, I feel a bit of the conversation and character is lost when the player can't probe for additional information themselves. So some of this seems to be about player characterization. So, for example, we get the very funny and compelling personality that I can give to the Goblin Postie via choosing the dialogue options that I felt would be more entertaining, made the repair version feel a lot more alive. Another said, it gave the feeling I was new in town and asking about things that everyone else knew about. I was being accepted into the social dynamics by being granted information when I asked about it. I see the question in chat, we'll come back to that. But it didn't just seem to affect PC characterization, it also affected NPC characterization, even though really the content of what they said didn't change. So a character noted, for example, that Tabitha seemed more engaging. We also did a second experiment to follow up on this because experiment one focused on how the player gets to contribute to conversation. So what burden of the memory they get to participate in, what burden of kind of taking part in information giving do they take on. Experiment two, by contrast, focuses on the NPCs and this common tendency in video games that NPCs forget they have same conversations with the PC. So in other words, if we put in some state tracking so that NPCs know what they've said before and what they've said to them, what difference does it make? We know that NPCs in many games will endlessly repeat themselves and they don't get frustrated about it, which disrupts immersion. We thought it seemed at least plausible that players would feel less agency when they're speaking to someone who doesn't feel real. And these endlessly repeating NPCs seem to lack pragmatic minds. They don't behave like real people behave. So tell us about it, Sean.
Yeah, so certainly that was the experience of some of our players. So in the game, they could experience a sequence like this. And we wanted to give them the context so that they could continue the conversation. But they said things like, this is very repetitive, or the response from the people is super repeated, just kinds to be like the same thing. So, like Steph said, we invented a little system based on how language works as far as linguists understand it. So if the PC asks something like where, then Tabitha's response is built from a couple of things. First of all, a receipt. So if the player has asked this question before, Tabitha says, oh, sorry, I said, and saves face. And the second time you do that, she says, I told you already. Then there's the repair solution. So where the castle of onions. And then the context that they give depends on the context that has previously been seen. So if they haven't talked about anything, she says it's where Mick lives. These grobbles are for him. If they've talked about grobbles already, then they'll just say it's where Mick lives, and so on. And if they talk about everything, then there's no extra context. This gives us an opportunity to change how each of these characters responds. So Tabitha responds by saving face, by giving an excuse. The fox saves face by joking, and the mage threatens face by blaming the player character, and will end the conversation if you keep asking questions. So this is more complicated than previously, but actually fairly manageable. So for example, here's a script of a part of this game that you could apply in ink that does a lot of sort of implicit state tracking that supports some of the mechanics that we're talking about. So we're going to show you some results. What did we find?
Which came in this week. Really hot off the press.
This morning.
This morning in some of these cases. Yeah.
So first of all, players preferred the second, the Repair Plus version. 52% preferred it compared to only 14% preferring the Control version.
And it's worth just reiterating that the Control version in the second experiment was the Repair version from the first experiment. So here we've got Repair versus Repair Plus.
Yeah. So they are similar, and lots of people responded that they seem to be the same. But there were lots of people talking about differences.
That's right.
Do
you want to do this?
No, you're right.
Oh, okay. So perhaps unsurprisingly, we found that NPCs having memory in this way enhances their characterization and the feeling of role play that players had in the game. So some quotes include, it felt more alive. The characters didn't just answer with the same text all the time. They actually got annoyed. Another, I felt the characters had more personality and I could push the dialogue in other ways, kind of signaling something about agency. I liked the characters getting progressively frustrated with you asking the same question, which is akin to what would likely happen in real life if you tried it with someone. And we also found that NPC memory enhances engagement. So one player said, the Repair Plus dialogue game is definitely 100% better for me because it just kind of attracts my attention and I want to see all of the outcomes. Another said the dialogue for the Repair Plus version had more depth and wasn't the same information each time. There was always a variation and also some comedy that came out of it, making me more engaged and wanting to continue.
We also found some interesting patterns. For example, because you have this sort of ability to ask lots of stuff, there's quite a lot of variation in how much people engaged with repair. And that related to with their sort of sense of agency. So people who did said that they preferred the repair plus version in terms of giving them a sense of agency, also engaged more with asking more questions, with one person asking 90 times, just going round and round. Maybe a statistical outlier in that case. Yeah, but this kind of, like Steph was saying, might suggest that there are different types of player. Some want to zoom towards getting the stuff done, and some are more interested in the engagement.
Perfect.
So as a summary, we run 3 different experiments. 3 times more people preferred a version of the dialogue with repair compared to no repair. And 3 times more people preferred a version with repair plus, and where NPCs had a memory compared to the repair version.
So the most important takeaways from this is that, as we predicted, it's nice when the theory bears out. Player testing shows that players prefer repair than this kind of forced exposition. That repair enhances player agency and characterization. As mentioned, that might not always be the kind of thing you're wanting to maximize in your game at that time, or might not speak to your audience's priorities. But if player agency and characterization are things you care about, repair is a relatively straightforward way to enhance that. And the NPC memory, the state tracking, specifically when it comes to have I spoken to you before and what did I learn, enhances engagement and characterization. We'll have some more results from experiment 2 soon when we've been able to do more of the analysis. One thing to take away from this is let us know if there are other things you would like us to test. And, that will factor into what we will think about going forward. We'll go to Q&A, but just a reminder to please take our survey. If you do one thing for us, if this has been useful in any way and you've shown up today, please take our survey. It's not very long, and it will allow us to keep doing these sorts of activities in the future. Okay, we'll take questions. So I'm going to read you some questions out of the chat, Sean.
Yeah.
Number 1, how much could this be? This is the preference for repair over control, about the greater volume of text.
Yeah, that's right. So there might just be, well, there's a greater volume of text from the player.
Yes.
And potentially more other things, so that there's just more time. The players get options about how to do that, so you can just skip through the dialogue and get less text if you want. But in the second experiment, there's actually very similar amounts of text, and we're still seeing the same kinds of differences. So I guess we would say that the main difference is in what the mechanic lets you do.
Yes.
But that's an interesting point. Yeah.
I do think that the experiment 2 makes me feel more confident about saying that it wasn't just about the volume of text, because the repair condition in experiment 2 still allowed for repetition, so people could see lots and lots of dialogue, and so did repair plus, and there were quite subtle changes in what was said, not so much in the volume of what was said, which makes me think that there's something going on here rather than just volume of text. Piers asks, could more fun or more engagement just be a greater number of choices rather than that the choices are repair?
Yeah, that's interesting. We'd have to look at so the interesting thing about the data that we have is we have a video of the players' responses responding as they're playing the game. And we see them pretty immediately. And the first time they get this thing, people say, oh, I like this kind of option. And I think maybe because repair is kind of unusual in games, maybe that's what they're responding to. But yeah, I guess we could do a version where we could do a version with repair versus questions. So instead of saying which place, we could say, tell me which place. And the issue there is this sort of it's face-threatening thing. It's a demand.
Yeah.
And there are sort of lampshades of this where the PC wandering around and saying, tell me about the castle, tell me about your shoes. And that seems kind of unnatural, where repair is supposed to be a bit more natural.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Clara asks, might be a tangential / obscure question. Is there any research on the differences in proportion of repair, e.g. asking for clarification, in real life conversations between neurotypical speakers versus neurodivergent speakers? Anecdotally, I found that neurotypical speakers may be more likely to prioritize conversational harmony over questions / asking for clarification.
That is a fascinating linguistic question. There is some data on this kind of stuff, but I don't know the answer. I believe your hypothesis, and yeah, if you give us a couple of years, we could test that. Yeah, very interesting.
So I guess one way to rephrase that is that neurotypical speakers, the hypothesis is, are more likely to try and save face, even
Oh, I see. Yeah.
at the expense of getting the information they actually need.
Yes.
And that's an interesting tension in video games, right? So part of the reason that exposition happens the way it is because there's an understanding that players need certain information in order to advance the game or experience the world or advance relationships. So one of the things that we're trying to do is suggest not that repair be the only mechanic you use, but that it can be a mechanic for when you want to give players more choice over how much and which information they hear about, and also if you want NPCs to feel more like equal parties in an exchange, like more like realistic parties. And we think these results suggest that it does in fact do that as a mechanic. Um,
Having said that, some players did interpret the player character as rude or at least cheeky. So I think you're right that there is a risk of seeming to be impolite in these things. That's kind of fun. Lots of players kind of enjoy that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody else, is this a survey for all talks? Yes, please. Feel free to specify in the open text questions if you like, if there were particular things that you liked or didn't like. That's really helpful for us. Charlie asks, with categorizations of audience, do you roughly split them into two types? Those who want to engage with narrative and those who want to skip the dialogue to get to the game? And with choices, do you split them roughly into two categories? Those that change narrative of story and those that just create an illusion of choice, or do you split either both into subcategories within that? Great question.
A dangerous question for a philosopher
Yeah,
to
I love a
categorize.
taxonomy. Very quickly, I mean, this distinction drawn between players that want to engage with the narrative and players who don't really want to engage with dialogue is just a very rough sketch of what might be explaining why, although the majority of people enjoyed repair more, and in fact, the more they engaged with it, the more they enjoyed it, that there was still this contingent that didn't really want to engage or didn't engage and thus preferred getting all the information in one go. Now, no doubt there is a more fine degree to
Yeah.
split that up.
And actually, we got an interesting response from one player who was like, "Oh no, I preferred the simpler, direct thing." But I think that's because I've been try games have trained me to see dialogue as a means to an end, right? And actually, they in their responses they kind of changed, and by the end they said something like, "Well, actually, it was more interesting. I did feel more engaged with the repair
Yeah.
version." So it might just be that these options aren't as out, or some people don't experience them, aren't sort of trained into role playing, which is
Yeah.
a sort of skill in itself, I think.
The second part of that question I think is interesting too. So with choices, do you split them into two categories, those that change narrative of story and those that just create an illusion of choice? No. I mean, I think there are I would categorize them as choices that have consequences and choices that just appear to. Now, what those consequences are, sometimes that's narrative, right? So sometimes that's going to cause a new branch in the story. Sometimes that just causes a change within the conversation. So the choices being made in the Repair Plus version affect how the NPCs respond to you. Um, and but they don't necessarily change, like the postie still is going on the same route through their day. So there are going to be some choices that have consequences for the world or that appear to but don't. Some choices that affect a given relationship or a given conversation or a much more kind of small context thing, and some that merely appear to. And then some choices that may or may not appear to have greater consequences, but do change how the player relates to the game or to the character or to the characters they're interacting with. So I do think that is,
And dialogue choices can be one of those
yes,
things, which I think is
exactly.
what we've sort of learned from this process.
Yeah, I think what's really striking is that you can use dialogue to enhance agency and you can do it with fairly minimal resources in a game that is linear. That's kind of a striking finding for us. Have you looked into the relationship between repair control in regards to player NPC romance in games? That is our next big project. So we've just put in a grant application to study how yeah, gender and sexuality in games gets navigated, including in romance dialogues. You know, results to come. Um, Clara says, I would assume that in video games, this effect of conversational harmony would be reduced if they are interfacing with NPCs rather than real people. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so part of what seems to cause player frustration often is when NPCs don't behave like real people in some important ways. They still want to be able to skip them. They still want to be able to speed them up. They
Yeah.
still want to be, you know, and there's another talk we could give about how you can do that in real life. But yeah, I think that's right. Um, Thank you so much. That's us at 2 o'clock. Thank you for all the lovely comments in the chat. Please do take the survey if you haven't already. We'll email you about the details. If you want anything or if you've got any kind of ideas or you'd like to chat through your games or you want to find out more about us, you can email us or find out more at tropeinformed.com. Thank you so much for coming to the workshop today. It's been an absolute joy and a delight having you all. And thank you again to Matt and to Go Testify and to the Centre for Sciences of Place and Memory. Anything you want to add? Yay! Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah. Let us help you. Please contact us.
Yes, we'll keep an eye on the chat for a little while and we'll respond to questions. But yeah, thank you so much.